Oh, hell, internet. Not much philosophy here recently, eh? I've been too angry. Can't read, can't write. And I've been angry about a number of things, but one of the things is the subject of this video. I'm going to try not to get angry, though, but just present a list of principles. So, anti-Zionism. Does it immediately and automatically equal anti-Semitism? I would say no, absolutely not. And I think any attempt to claim that is rather disingenuous, or at least in the political sense it is. I will explain why that is in a moment. But like I said, let's just go through my perspective as a series of principles, and anyone who watches this and disagrees can point out exactly where they disagree. So I'm going to start with a sort of point A, the basic abstract moral equality of all human beings, given that we are here and given that we are all Homo sapiens. So if any one human dies, in the abstract, that is equally a bad thing. And if any one human is killed in a world in which we accept any morality at all, then that is an equally morally bad thing. So you can, of course, complicate that in the same way that you can complicate the trolley problem. If you tell a person that one of the people, or the one person they divert to is a family member of theirs, then obviously people make a different decision, and no real world decision is devoid of that, to be fair. And I obviously accept that, and it will inform the responses of anyone who's replying to this. But this basic abstract moral equality is what I refer to when I look at the numbers in Israel and Palestine, and that overrides any other moral argument that I can see being relevant. The numbers do not lie. Since 2023 or since 1948. Now, I know in 1948 it was started by the Arabs, but we'll come back to that as well in a moment. But yeah, that is why I think that the claim that anti-Zionism automatically equals anti-Semitism is extremely suspect on its face, just based on the numbers of people who have died. I've actually had people come to me in a comment section and suggest that this is a crude moral calculus, that I should be in some way more enlightened in my judgment of this. Again, please tell me why. I don't think that person did on this occasion. They were just condescending at me. And this leads us on to how maybe you can say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism to a certain extent, if, and only if, you are ideologically committed to one of the Abrahamic religious texts, be it the Torah, the Bible, or the Quran, or any of the ancillary ones. So that is the only way you can justify saying that, apropos of nothing else, anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism. And if you have to take that position, then I would say that makes you a religious fundamentalist. And that's fine for you to be. But can you be upfront about that and stop lying about it? Because it seems to me that many people are. This was supposed to be one of the greatest achievements of the Judeo-Christian West. It was the idea that everything political now was done with the cold light of rationality and was above the tribal and cultish concerns of former times. So with that, I'd like to go on to what Zionism is. And in an earlier, longer version of this video, I actually wanted to just go on screen and look at different sources and find different definitions of Zionism from the pro-Zionist, the moderate, the anti-Zionist side. And it quickly became clear that wasn't necessary because no one essentially disagrees on what Zionism is. There doesn't seem to be much contention between the various sides. I'm going to reduce it to 3 principles here, and you can, again, comment on whether you think that it's reasonable that I break it down in this way. So, the 3 principles of Zionism are that the Jewish people have a right to a safe space for their political group, their body politic, that place should be located in the lands around the Mount of Zion, Jerusalem, and the lands around. And then finally, that the Jewish people should have absolute political and moral autonomy and authority within that land. And to those 3 principles, I answer yes, I guess, and no. So the easy yes is just to say, yeah, in a world of nation states, there should be a nation state in which the Jewish people are safe and can express themselves as part of the body politic as a whole. But it does not mean that they have to constitute a body politic within that state that has its own rights and exclusive powers. This is something I apply more broadly, of course. This is not something I ascribe only to the Jewish people. With regard to the second one, I'm sorry, I can quibble. There is no reason why the Jewish state had to be instituted in the lands around Palestine. I don't care about the magic books. I don't care about your cultural history, in the sense that if you're going to be safer here, squeezed between two allied countries who have plenty of open land to share, obviously there would have been problems with this solution too, and there are definitely anti-Semites in both of those countries, or were around the 1940s. But come on now, wouldn't that have been a better solution? And that's before you even consider things from the Arab perspective. And yes, they are entitled to one. They saw the colonial powers merrily taking over the world for centuries. Then they had these world wars, which involved everyone, but were started in Europe. And in the second one, this huge cultural atrocity was committed against the Jewish people by one of the European colonial powers. And at the end of that war, not only did the European colonial powers say, by the way, Arabs, these are the countries you live in now, I hope that's all right. Then they said, oh, and by the way, we're going to take this part of a country away from you so that we can give it to the Jewish people against whom we've just committed this massive cultural atrocity. And then they said, by the way, everyone, we've just decided the imperial age is over and these nation states are now sacred and these borders are not to be disrespected. And if you do, then you can know you're going against the righteous tradition of the Judeo-Christian West, ignoring the fact that Islam has been involved in the development of the Western cultural tradition ever since its inception. The arrogance and absolute stone-headed ignorance of the Western powers when they say they don't know why the Iranians and other Arab states refer to them as the Great Satan is mind-boggling to my view. And so we come to the third point, that the Jews have absolute autonomy and authority politically within their lands. And no, simply no. No ethno-states, nowhere, not just for the Jews, no ethno-states, no apartheid states, and no genocides, thank you please. Yes, it was. I will say it plainly, ethno-states are childish. Childish. I will explain why, but it's a fairly bold claim, I will admit. But ever since the beginning of technological mankind, even earlier than that I would say, but at least up to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you could kind of pretend that the world was big enough that any group could kind of live apart from any other group. But after the beginning of the industrial and technological ages, that is obviously not true. And you can clearly see that throughout history, the times when different groups among mankind have cooperated have produced the most complexity, the most innovation, and the most, in terms that I think most people would acknowledge, advancement of the technologies and the ideas that human beings have access to. So no, ethno-states, the idea that you can say, la, 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 I do not want to see anyone who's different from me, I do not want to challenge my worldview in any way, it's obviously childish. And the irony is it often comes from mostly Abrahamic traditions where they're often all in on this kind of, the world is hard, God's going to challenge you, you can't resist the challenges, you got to meet them and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And yet they appear to be the biggest snowflakes of them all when it comes to looking at anything that is different from them. And this really gets to what I would call the hypocrisy of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, I know this is not exactly a hot take, but it is fairly clear that the Judeo-Christian tradition, insofar as it considers itself a single tradition, is massively hypocritical, and that is only more clear into the 21st century, as they claim to have invented all the principles upon which civilized society rests. But now, increasingly, they claim to be able to ignore those principles as many times as they like, as long as they claim that it's in response to some great cultural threat, a cultural threat which may be real. There are definitely examples of all the different cultural problems that have been used by the right in various countries. But the idea that they represent a huge wave, a concerted invasion, and not just the simple development of cultures over time, is, I would say, entirely without real support. And I think I can understand, although not accept, that the hypocrisy of the Judeo-Christian tradition and the wider Abrahamic tradition, to rope in the Muslims here, because they're all the same ultimately, is what I call the faith fallacy. And the faith fallacy is that there is any particularly valid form of faith. There is any one more valuable form of faith. I would go further. I will say that in my mind, every single human being has exactly the same amount of faith. Why? Because if you question every single human being down to their most fundamental ideas, every single human being will have a set of premises which they believe to be true, but will be unable to prove. In other words, they will believe those things entirely on faith. I believe it was an early Christian thinker who said, "It is the conviction of an existence unperceived." And that's very neutral. That does not refer in any way to a specific existence unperceived. And all of this leads me on to what I refer to as the moral cosmological principle. And you can probably hear Sam Harris quietly going crazy off in the distance there. But no, it is the case that just like in cosmology, there is no special reference point for the universe, in morality, there is no special reference point for absolute moral truth. Now, you can always argue for your own particular moral strictures, and I would indeed do that. And overall, I would absolutely agree that the way that life is conducted in the developed Western democracies is far more the kind of life I would like to lead. Now, I did grow up in it, but since leaving Western Europe and moving to Asia, I've now picked up on things that I say, well, yeah, we get most of the benefits. And I would say there's even a few things in the Asian way of doing things that I would prefer. I quipped the other day that I feel like I've become 25% more Thai since moving to Thailand 14 years ago. And even in this ad-libbed video, I feel like I should clarify, I'm not saying you can't favor one moral perspective on the world, but if you do have a moral perspective which has certain principles, then it should be shown in the way that you choose to interact with the world, even those who are definitely against your moral perspective. And once again, this was a thing which, for the whole of the 20th century, was an absolutely core point of the Judeo-Christian Western political project. But you don't need to have left your country and lived somewhere else to understand that in the technological age, it's obviously true that no, your magic book does not have political capital. None of them do. Not one single tome of scripture has any political relevance in the modern geopolitical environment. It never should have, technically, but it was easier to defend before the 20th century. If you are claiming otherwise, that yes, there is political relevance to any scripture at all, I would say that commits you to being a religious fundamentalist. And I would further say that that commits you against the idea of general liberty. I mean, you can say that some people have freedom to do some things, but ultimately you're going to say, but anyone who doesn't believe the way I believe shouldn't get to do the things they want to do. So all of this is why I come to the conclusion that the numbers, the genocide in Gaza, the supremacy, the obvious racial supremacy that is being demonstrated in many parts of the Israeli government and the Israeli population, all of this tells me, with my moral compass, with which you are free to disagree, that no, the Zionist project is not a productive one. It is not a humane one. Not the way it's being perpetrated right now. I want the Jewish people to live in a place that is safe. Like I say, if it had been me round the table in 48, I would have been pushing for the US and Canada to be Israel's neighbors. But here we are. And I do accept to a certain extent, the cultural history. I don't want to be absolutely ignorant of that. But if that was the case, then the 1948 borders should have stuck. And sure, the Arabs attacked you, and they lost. And I'm glad they lost, in the sense that I'm glad the Jewish people weren't eradicated completely, or the Israeli state wasn't eradicated completely, once it had been instituted. But that does not give you the right to do a creeping annexation of the entire region. And that's what's going on. First, it was Palestine. It's already being talked about in Lebanon. You can bet your ass that Iran, if it collapses into instability, will be a target for expansion. This is not acceptable, or at least this is what we have been told by the Judeo-Christian West was not acceptable for decades. And yet now here we are. So please, someone tell me, how can you say that anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism unless you term yourself a religious fundamentalist? Bye for now.